So I always say that Twitter is my favorite political matchmaking app, and this is another example of that. Someone I've encountered over the last couple of years on the platform and had a couple interactions with, always found entertaining, and that's Jon DiPietro. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, AJ. Good to be here.
I happened to run into you also last week at the Americans for Prosperity event, so it kind of shows you the alignment that some people might see between us politically. So that was cool. And he runs Liberty Digital. We're going to dive into that. Politics, activism. I think these are all very important things and interesting things that you got going on. But I mean, let's start off with politics because it's just fun. I mean, how would you self-identify yourself? I feel like you align kind of similarly to me.
Yeah, probably. So let me put it this way. My libertarian friends think I'm a statist bootlicker. My Democrat friends think I'm a Nazi fascist, and my Republican friends think I'm a dope-smoking anarcho-capitalist. So I'm kind of a political Rorschach test, depending on whatever the last tweet I sent out was. I'm either a Trump apologist, or I'm a never-Trumper. One of my taglines is "Make skepticism great again," which is something I coined during the COVID lockdowns when there was zero skepticism coming from anywhere, and it was really frustrating for me to watch how tribalism just completely overtook everybody's brain and overrode any capacity to do any serious decision making, and we're seeing the consequences now.
Yeah, I mean, the term I always throw around with my politics is nuance. I'm constitutionalist, first and foremost. I think the common language that our society has is essential to anything productive ever happening politically or culturally. I mean, how would you... do you think there's a difference between how you view your skepticism versus nuance?
No, if you Venn diagram those two things, I think there'd be a high degree of overlap. I think that when you apply skepticism, you end up with a nuanced view, and one of the things that I really focus on, and that I've sort of I've learned, is the how to recognize cognitive dissonance, not just recognize it, but embrace it. So, personally, like just from my personal perspective, I think Matt Taibbi's a great example for me, right? Because I'm old. I used to listen to him way back in the 90s on a radio show called Imus in the Morning that some people may or may not have heard of. And he used to cause me a lot of cognitive dissonance. He would say a lot of things that I'd bristle at, and so I wrote him off. And but now I recognize that he's a skeptic, right? And he takes nuanced positions. I would argue that he's changed, since he's changed in the last 20 years. I think he'd be the first one to tell you that. But, that's just an example. Like, I go out of my way to listen to people I disagree with. So the vast majority of the content that I listen to, that I take in, is what I would call center-left. And maybe even further than that. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to know where my opponents are coming from.
Yeah.
And number two, I want to steelman my own arguments, right? So I want to hear what's the best argument against a position that I hold. And, it turns out that when you do that, sometimes you change your mind. And
Imagine
I've
that.
certainly done
Imagine that not being an ideologue and only thinking one way. I mean, that would be a productive thing. I mean, that's the big thing that's killed me with this, getting this outlet going over here with the New England Take is, and in my interactions with other members of the press through just my experience in industry is, I can get all the conservative politicians on the show. Basically, they're more than willing to have conversations, even if they don't necessarily agree with me, whether the libertarian, conservative, anything like that. We find common ground on certain things, but it's impossible to get anyone established with the political or activist left. Like almost none of them. Like some of the media will be able to do that, and I see the opposite. Like there are members of the right that refuse to talk to the New Hampshire Bulletin and the Monitor and these different outlets like that because they sway a certain way editorially. It's terrible. Like I'm shooting stuff off to them. It's like, I don't know if this is useful for you, but I may have to speak to one of these guys. I mean, maybe you can find, maybe it'll be helpful for your reporting in the future.
Yeah. It's a little bit of cutting off your nose to spite your face, I think. I understand it. One of the messages I was trying to get across a few years ago, when there was sort of a mass social media exodus by the right, when you saw all the cancellations and suspensions and the censorship that was happening on Facebook and Twitter, you had a lot of conservatives who were leaving and going, over to Truth and Rumble and all these other places. And I said, look, bad idea, bad strategy. I understand that it's not a level playing field. I understand that it's hard, that it's frustrating, enraging that we have to do this stuff, but if you leave, you're ceding ground. You're just leaving the playing field, and you're letting the other team do whatever they want. Number one, and number two, things change, right? So look at Twitter now.
X.
X, people who abandoned that for the last 2-3 years, they could have spent the last 2 or 3 years if they avoided getting banned, right? Which is a big if. But if they managed to avoid the ban hammer, then, think of all the audience growth that they missed out on in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think everyone should consider like Twitter, Facebook, etc. as the town square. I'm not just from a general cultural perspective. Policy perspective, I don't even know what to consider when it comes to that side. Politicians don't know what to do with it. These CEOs don't know what to do with it. But as a group of users on these platforms, to consider just don't follow the person. If you hate ContraPoints, for example, don't follow that individual. If you hate Sargon of Akkad, don't follow Carl. It kind of works that way, and it'll self-sort itself. The algorithm, as evil as the algorithms may be, they serve a purpose in that way. And when you just leave, guess what? It's the platform is just going to be bombarded, and we saw extremism begin to really flourish, and outlets like Gab that ended up taking a totally different direction. And I'm like, guys, this is just increasing the toxicity, not fixing it.
Definitely. So during the whole Stop the Steal thing, the echo chambers really did a lot of harm. My background, I'm an engineer, been a computer nerd for, going on 40 years now. And so I've been using computers all my life. I dabbled a little bit in cybersecurity, about 15 years ago. So I know enough to be dangerous about stuff like that. And when all of these just absolute crackpot theories were going around with regard to the election machines, I can't tell you how many hours I spent watching these absolutely absurd YouTube channels, these grifters. Sometimes we throw around the word grifter a little bit recklessly, but I mean, this is the absolute definition of grifting, where these people who were just, glomming onto this controversy and fanning the flames of, just some of these absolutely ridiculous things that I was debunking left and right, and some people I was able to change a few minds, and some people it wasn't effective. But I was trying to tell people, look, we have election integrity problems. There's no doubt about that, and but by focusing and amplifying all of these things that are easily disprovable, that are just absolutely ridiculous, you're taking the attention off of the real stuff, like the real fraud and the real issues that we have with our elections. Because, give me a break. There's no such thing as a 100% white, pure white as the driven snow, 0% fraud election. There's always some there, and the question is, where, how much, and it all culminated in Georgia, where everybody was so demoralized that Republicans just sort of said, well, why am I going to vote? It's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, this is the utter example of the Republicans versus Democrats approach to fixing the problem too, when you look at it, because in my opinion, what makes our federal election system so great in this country is we have the federalism situation going on, where each state is able to control their own elections. Yeah, there's federal laws when it comes to certain aspects of it, promotion, different things like that, fundraising, obviously. That's definitely important, because it's so vital to how campaigns run. But when it comes down to the elections themselves, federalism is fantastic, in my opinion. And the Republicans on one side are saying, yes, that's great, let's do this, let's take it even further and do some other manipulations and stuff. In my opinion, the really bad attempt to fix with the Democrats is, no, we're going to centralize this. We're going to make this something Congress is going to regulate across the board, damned with the implications of what could go wrong, or the corruption that's possible, or the infrastructure alone. I mean, good God, can you imagine if we relied on the feds for the election infrastructure, where we'd have a singular system to get broken, whether it's the technology, the systems, the staff in charge of it, all these sorts of things. It's counterproductive for both sides to both be so close-minded with looking at what went wrong, because it did not go smoothly, obviously, whether it's the leadership, because of Trump and his supporters saying all sorts of crazy things when it came to the elections being stolen. And on the other side, Democrats saying, there was no election interference or fraud, even though you look back to 2016 when they were saying the opposite.
Well, yeah, exactly. Not only that, I mean, you have, this video. You have multiple big tech companies, CEOs, on video talking to their employees, telling them, we won't let this happen again, And then you had the articles about fortifying the election, and, so there's no question that there were attempts there to put the thumbs on the scales. And the question is, how much of that was legal? There was a lot of, thanks to COVID, there were a lot of changes to election law at the last minute. And so it was just, for anybody to pretend that this was just, just business as usual and nothing to see here is, it's either just grossly naive or, utterly propagandist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ignoring all the real problems. Ignoring all the real problems entirely. Like the press coverage of everything around it is definitely one way the scales are tipped, that social media outlets ended up being a huge issue with regards to that, whether it's the Hunter Biden laptop or just in general what was allowed to. The banhammer issue was very prevalent in leading up to the 2020 election. And
yeah, I mean, I was talking about it in 2015. Like, I was talking about election interference specifically with regard to social media companies and Google. Like, there was research that was done back in 2015 that Google's search algorithm was, could sway, anywhere from 7 to, I think the number was like 10% of the vote. No, not at all.
Jeez, we're still, as much as we like to think we in the tech space, we're in a good shape. Our society is modern and we have all these understandings and stuff. We're still in the wild, wild west with how quickly these technologies are developing, and the impact it's having on our society it takes years to know what it did. Like, when we start putting the goggles on, it's going to take us years to know what sort of health and emotional implications that'll start to happen with things around that. Is imaging and cameras and such improved? I mean, this is like a minor way of looking at it, but you look at the photography industry that's just totally changed over the last decade, and now everyone's a photographer. Everyone's got their smartphone that takes good pictures. Where now it's if you have anybody can get a camera used for a couple $100, let alone what's on their phone, and do amazing. It completely upended what is expected for a photographer to be able to do. Like, when I go on a shoot, because I do that on the side sometimes and part of my day job, and it's like I got to turn it around now. Like, they want these pictures as soon as possible, and I'm using a real camera, making sure it looks good. So you have to set the expectations differently. The tech space is totally that, and it's been ever changing. I'd imagine for you, especially 40 years in the space, I can't even imagine what that's like. I'm 36. Like, I've got 13 years out of college here, and thinking about how much has changed just over that small amount of time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I got my first computer at age, what was I? I was like, I think 14 or 15. So I've been at it a long time, and I think the pace of change of technology is, definitely accelerating. So, like, if you look at graphs of these different platforms that have launched and the adoption curves, right? How quickly these platforms reach 1 million users. And you start off with, like, Facebook, and it took, I don't know how many years for Facebook. And then Twitter was a little bit faster, and YouTube was a little bit faster. And then you get all the way up to Threads, which just launched a few months ago. I mean, it was like 24 hours. They reached 1 million users. So, these adoption curves are accelerating, and that's an issue, right? I mean, our government was designed to be slow and messy and dysfunctional, right? So for it, I mean, I don't think that it has caught up to 90s technology, let alone 2023 technology. So that's a problem. But I think the bigger problem, really, and this gets kind of deep philosophically, but I just think we don't appreciate the degree to which everything needs to change. Our brains, our ideologies, our policies, our laws, everything that we've developed as humans over the last 100,000 years, right? That was all based on a world made of atoms. We live in a world made of bits now, okay? And that's a very, very different world. Like I tell people, our brains are wired just exactly backwards to deal with a world of bits as opposed to a world of atoms. Like, everything is backwards. The math, our brains are backwards. The math is totally different. Like, everything about it is different. And a lot of libertarian philosophy is, deeply rooted in a world of atoms, and I think has some blind spots, some holes, when it comes to living in a digital world, specifically around things like IP and what is the definition of property. It's pretty obvious in a world made of atoms. Yeah. Like, there's some gray areas there about, property rights and things like that, but it gets really, really tricky when you're talking about a world made of bits and very messy. So, I think that we saw quite a bit of this during COVID, and people are starting to wake up to that fact. I don't think they fully appreciate the ramifications, but when you saw like the Canadian truckers, right, and how their bank accounts were getting frozen. You look at Russell Brand now with what's happening to him. We kind of see that there's something weird going on, but I still don't think there's a full appreciation for really how much things have changed already and are going to continue to rapidly evolve over the next few years. And now throw AI and ChatGPT and deep fakes into the mix, and it's just like, I give up. Yeah, exactly. Like, I have a relationship with UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law here in Concord. They're an IP-based school for a lot of their specialties, and I follow a bunch of those lawyers, and they're all like, oh, it's this, no, it's this, and totally different opinions. Like these super like big government Democrats are suddenly extremely libertarian when it comes to intellectual property in this realm, and the super conservative federalist types are like, well, I don't know. It seems like they're the ones that really aren't really diving into it quite as much. I've had Seth Orenberg on another podcast before, who's more of a free market guy, and it's entertaining picking his brain. I got the feeling he's really trying to sort it out because it's a lot more complex than what people think it is on the face of it. It's nuanced, right? Yeah, exactly. It's bring it all the way back around. And it's going to be fascinating, especially as the blockchains begin and that sort of technology expands more and more. The ways in which, in my opinion, that blockchain is going to be important is going to take time, because they're very well enrooted systems that would move over to it, whether it is healthcare and being able to have your data be able to go from institution to institution in a more smooth fashion than we have right now, or money from bank to bank and going into digital currencies, aside from the digital currency we've basically had for the last God knows how long because of how our economy works, because we don't run on the gold standard, in case you forgot. And these are institutions that move exceedingly slower than Congress moves, which is really saying something. And I think one day we're just going to go, holy crap, we changed everything with how we process data and information. And it may happen 10 years down the road, it may happen 20 years down the road, but we're going to go, oh boy, this is different. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we already are, right? Just looking at, like I said, AI, which I think, again, I'm not sure that, even with all the hype that it's had recently, I'm still not sure that people fully appreciate the impact. I tell people, I went in front of the school board here in Manchester a couple months ago to talk about it, and I do digital marketing. That's my day job. And I've been using AI tools for 4 or 5 years. And up until ChatGPT, they were like, meh, you know, they were okay. They had some specialty cases where they were helpful. You know, specifically like the niche where I used it was for search engine optimization,
Yep.
right? That's really where it was helpful for me. And then I played with ChatGPT, and my head just blew into a million pieces. Like, it was, I can't overstate how different it was from anything I'd ever used, and how much of a quantum leap it was in a very, very short period of time. And you know, I think the tweet where you know, you saw me the other day and then reached out to me was about the digital activism training that I do. And that's, you know, one of the things that I've been showing political candidates and activists is the power of using these tools. And people are just absolutely blown away when I show them what you can do with this thing.
Yeah, it's bananas. Like, it's it gives you a staff of at least first draft writers that can totally just say, give me 5 different versions of this message and export it to me, and I can just make sure that they didn't screw up, that there isn't one too many emojis that don't make any sense, and copy and paste it and dump it into different things, and it looks like a real person did it. The natural language models we're finally seeing. We were sold a bill of goods with Siri. This is what Siri was supposed to be. We were told, like, this is what humans want to interact with, because it's conversational.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really underrated capabilities of ChatGPT, you know, you mentioned how powerful and useful it is for, you know, ideating and creating stuff, creating drafts and whatnot, and it totally is. But another thing that it's really, really useful for is summarizing content, right? So I just did it today. You know, there was somebody tweeted out this Spotify podcast. Click on it, go to the transcript, copy, paste it into this summary tool that I have, and you get a 2 or 3 sentence summary and then a series of bullet points. I use it for YouTube videos. You know, YouTube videos that are 2-3 hours long, sift them right down to a summary paragraph and 5 or 10 bullets. Something really amazing that I've been playing around with is analyzing legislation. So I've come up with prompts where I feed it general court URL to the bill text, and then I ask it a series of questions. And like some of the questions I'll ask it, I'll start off by saying, does this bill affect the manner or amount of taxation? Does this bill affect civil liberties? Does it affect, you know, and you can go down and give it a series of questions so that right off the bat you can categorize what things this bill does or does not address. And then the thing that I like to do is then I'll ask it to, you know, provide a summary, but then the really cool part, and the thing that it is surprisingly good at, shockingly good at, is you ask it, give me the pros and cons of this bill from the perspective of a progressive Democrat, a conservative Republican, and a libertarian. And it does a phenomenal job of pulling out, you know, what each side would find as either positive or negative about the bill. And it can help identify red flags. It can steelman arguments, all of those things. So just an incredibly useful tool in that regard.
Yeah, let's dive into what you're doing with digital activism. As I saw, you've done Americans for Prosperity, you partnered with them for some trainings and such in person, but you also have an online course. You had to watch your description on that, which is great. It looks really professional, which it sounds really good. So many of these things out there, like it's just some idiot on Zoom recording into with a PowerPoint, click, click, click. It looks professional. It looks and sounds good. The audio is like the most important thing, is the cliche, but it's true. Tell me what you're doing with that course.
So, as I mentioned, my day job is digital activism, digital marketing. So, companies hire me to do websites, online advertising, Google AdWords, Facebook ads, social media management, email, et cetera, et cetera. Just, basically the full digital marketing technology stack. And my job is they hand me $1 and I have to hand them back at least $2, preferably $5 or $10, right? On return on investment for their marketing and advertising. So that's my day job. Also, I've been a political junkie my entire life. I wouldn't call myself an activist until about the last, I would say, maybe 12 years, is when I would say I was an activist, and it was education that got me into it. And one of the things that was just infinitely frustrating to me in looking at how political candidates and activists were using the web and social media, they were horrible at it, and they still are. And in my intro class, I go over 2 case studies. They're really so. In my last decade of watching campaigns, and I'm talking about campaigns all the way from dog catcher and school board up to president of the United States. I have seen exactly 3 campaigns, 3 out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that I've thousands probably that I've seen. There were 3 that were immediately obvious to me that they were being run by professionals. And when I say professionals, I mean digital marketing professionals, because one of the things I tell people is, you show any first-year marketing associate, wet behind the ears, fresh out of school, you show them some of the nonsense that these political campaigns do, they'd be like, I'd be fired if I did that. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So those 3 campaigns are, first of all, was Obama for America, his re-election campaign. And that was groundbreaking in a number of different ways, but just to summarize it into like 20 seconds, the 2 really groundbreaking things that he did is, number 1, he approached it like a startup. He ran the campaign like a big tech startup from a perspective of technology, strategy, and operations. That was one thing that he did. The other thing that he did that was completely novel at the time was he put the technology guys and the data guys and the marketing guys in charge of his campaign, as opposed to like speechwriters. In my trainings, I like to show a scene from the movie Moneyball. If people who haven't seen that, it's about baseball, Major League Baseball, and how they went from the old-fashioned way of scouting players and managing the team, which was, intuition and gut feel and experience and whatnot, to everything is data-driven, like to a point that I think is nauseating to most baseball fans, right? But that was Obama's approach, and as far as I'm concerned, that won him re-election, because people forget he was deeply unpopular. Obamacare was deeply unpopular, and but he ended up winning. And then the second campaign that was obviously run by people who knew what they were doing was Trump's campaign. And I insist, my professional opinion is, Trump won because of 2 people, Kellyanne Conway and Brad Parscale. So Kellyanne Conway identified in 6 swing states specific precincts that they needed to win. And then Brad Parscale put together an advertising strategy to deliver that. And then unfortunately, the third campaign that is very obvious to me, that is run by professionals, is Biden's re-election campaign. His announcement, some of the job descriptions that they've put out, it's very clear to me that that they've got people who know what they're doing, and everybody else is somewhere between clown show and dumpster fire with regard to what they're doing on digital. So basically, what I do in my training is I try to show people, candidates and activists, how to think like a marketer instead of a politician.
Does it scale to the local and state level now? Are we getting there? The big thing that's on the media side is a bear to grow a local outlet at the regional level. It's really hard to do that. But with the advantage of activism is you have a lot more of that face time and the ideology behind it that you can try and decide with you. Are we there yet?
Yeah, it's really the that's the advantage of the internet, right? So there's a CEO of a company down in Boston called HubSpot. His name's Brian Halligan. He's one of the founders of the company. And he has something that he's been saying for a long time, and that is that in old media, right, so outbound media like television, radio, newspapers, in old media, getting your message out was all about the depth of your wallet. In social media and the internet, it's more about the width of your mind, right? So if you can create good content, if you can be remarkable, in the words of Seth Godin, then you can get your message out, Sure, it's easier if you have money. It's great if you can get the advertising out there, but it's absolutely doable. It is not a short-term thing. It's not something that's another pet peeve of mine, is that candidates tend to, campaign for 4 months every 2 years. And I'm like, what are you doing? The next campaign starts the day after the election, right? That's when the next campaign starts. And I'm always stressing building assets. And the 2 assets that you have are a website and a high-quality email list. You should be building that 365 days a year, every single year, not waiting for the election to roll around when everybody else is competing for the same mind share and attention. You've got another year and a half in between elections where you essentially have the field to yourself. That's changing. People are slowly starting to realize the power of building their own audiences. And so you're seeing more and more people adopt that, but the uptake is still very, very slow. And the opportunity to be out there and have the field almost to yourself is enormous, and there just aren't enough people taking advantage of that.
It's part of the reason I guarantee why Trump decided to announce so early is he knew he was going to be the bull in the china shop to begin with, and if he was the first and biggest bull in that china shop before everyone else started running, he was gonna have the brand awareness. He was gonna get all the earned media, the organic coverage, all the interviews he decided to do that were very skewed with certain people. It paid off because he took that opening, which was early, and it worked.
Yeah, first mover's advantage.
It's at what point do you think you start doing the paid? Like, do you do it little at first, or do you wait till you start rolling?
That's a great question. So, at the risk of getting too deep into tactics and marketing speak, one of the big challenges, or not one, the big challenge that you have in advertising is identifying and then reaching your target audience, right? And by target audience, I don't mean the people in your district. I'm talking about the people in your district who care about school choice, who care about the Second Amendment, who care about abortion, right? So, I'm talking about that level of voter ID, of audience identification, and then getting the exact right message. Because again, going back to the Trump case study, that's how he won, was micro-targeting, right? It wasn't just throwing out, blanket vanilla messaging to and sending the same message to everybody. They were micro-targeting and using psychographics and all kinds of stuff to very, very carefully and very meticulously target their messaging to the people they wanted to reach. So the question is, how do you do that? Well, there are techniques that I teach in the class that allow you to, over time, to build up these audiences and identify people according to the issues that they care about. And you are best served doing that, as I was talking about, off election cycle. Because the thing about online advertising is, again, as opposed to traditional outbound advertising in like television, radio, where it's very linear, right? They just give you basically a menu and say, here, pick one, and you know exactly how much it's going to cost to reach this many people, right? Online advertising doesn't work that way because it's an auction. So it's constantly changing, and just to oversimplify it, it's based on supply and demand. So if you wait until a month before a presidential election, I mean, you're going to be paying through the nose to reach people, as opposed to doing it in an off year where it's going to be much cheaper. So, you can be doing that part of it, laying your groundwork, doing your audience identification, building your custom audiences, all that stuff. You should be doing that as a slow trickle long before. But then when your campaign starts in earnest, right, and July you declare and November's the election, what I advise people is sit down, write out a timeline, identify the different things that you want to do on a week-by-week basis. There are different stages of the campaign, different objectives that you're going to have. At some point, you're going to want to just do pure name recognition. You're going to want to increase your email subscriber list. You're going to want donations. You're going to want yard signs, all these different things. Map that all out, figure out when you're going to do it in your campaign, and then, obviously, this is all leading up to a get out the vote sprint that last week or so before the election, where you're going to have to reserve a good chunk of your budget. Timeline wise, it is. Scott Adams, in one of the books that he wrote, he talks, and he talks about this a lot online as well, is the importance of systems rather than goals, right? So I like to use that to describe the way you should be approaching digital. It's not a goal, right? It's a system. It's a continuous loop. It's always running. You're always out there. You're always getting your name out there. You're always building influence. You're always creating goodwill and building your email list, building your website traffic, building those audience lists, et cetera, et cetera. Always working, always investing in those assets. And then, when campaign season comes, you're doing everything that you've been doing all along. You're just cranking it up and maybe dumping some money in there as well to accelerate what you're trying to do and the number of people that you're trying to reach.
Now, when it came to both Obama and Trump, how important do you think it was that they were reaching out to populations that weren't the traditional populations for their respective party? And do you know if the data played out on that? I mean, big deal with Obama is he got a lot of red-blooded Republicans voting for him and going to his side because they were like, I'm sick of this damn system. And guess what? 4 years later, Trump did exactly the same thing with the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's why, so, that's why the identification is so important, and the techniques and the tactics that I teach, because, back in the old days, pre-Cambridge Analytica, Facebook was just the Facebook advertising was a money printing machine. It was, the best, the second best ad platform ever invented by man after Google AdWords, and just absolutely incredible. And the tools that they gave you to be able to target people were just phenomenal. Now, I think people, especially specifically in the political realm, I think they over-relied on them, because you used to be able to, they used to have all of these hundreds and hundreds of built-in categories that used to be able to target. 95% of that's gone now. They don't let you target that anymore. But you used to be able to target supposedly, people who were interested in, who were very conservative, somewhat conservative, moderate, liberal, very liberal, right? Those used to be things that you could target on Facebook. I never particularly trusted them, but I think a lot of people relied on that as a crutch. But either way, the fact of the matter is that's all gone now, and you're on your own. And you, one way or another, you have to build your own lists. And, a lot of people will buy them from something like i360. People will, upload voter lists, which is technically a violation of Facebook's terms of service, but everybody does it. I don't know that anybody's ever been caught or punished for it, but those are certainly avenues that you could pursue. But like I said, if you understand a couple of basic tactics and employ a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of hustle, and learn how to do video, you can build a lot of this yourself for little to no cost. And it will be, I guarantee you, it will be orders of magnitude higher quality than anything you could buy from any of these list vendors. That's just a lead pipe lock.
All right, we're about out of time here. Any closing thoughts on any of this? I really appreciate you taking the time today to have this conversation.
No, that was fast. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on. Check out digitalactivism.us if any of this is interesting or intriguing to you. As you mentioned, I run training classes with AFP New Hampshire, and actually throughout the Northeast. I'm traveling to New Jersey tomorrow to do a class down there for AFP. Do free training for town committees and whatnot. Going to be cranking up the webinar machine here shortly to start, doing more of this training, more of this, delivering this content to activists, and stop acting like a politician. I tell people. I have a number of pet peeves, but a couple of one of the bigger ones is that politicians just will not stop talking about themselves. And we know in marketing, nobody cares. Nobody cares about you or your product. All they care about is what you can do to make their life better. What do you see from politicians all day long is, look at how many doors I knocked. Look at the event I went to yesterday. Look at all these important people, et cetera, et cetera. They're always talking about themselves, and you're rarely. Sometimes you'll see them talking about things that are wrong, but what you rarely see them doing is explaining to people how their lives will be better if you vote for me, right? And that's what you got to do. If you want to think like a marketer, that's what you got to do. Is you got to show people how their life is going to be transformed. That's what people vote for. They vote because they're pissed off, and or because somebody has persuaded them, sold them on a transformation that's going to happen in their life. And that's what I do as a marketer every day. Is this is how this oil change is going to transform your life, right? That's literally how I approach it. And whether I'm coming up with what I'm going to put on a web page or in an ad, I'm always thinking that way. Identifying with the customer, with the prospect, what is their situation right now? What are they going to identify with? What's going to get their attention? What is eating at them? And then what's going to appeal to them as far as a transformation? That's what successful messaging
Hope
looks like.
and make America great again. Prime examples of everything right there. If those are the greatest case studies.
Absolutely. And I talk about that in my class. When we're talking about messaging and strategy, I bring up those two. Those are two of the best political taglines ever, partially because they're so vague, right? Because one of the things that our brains do very, very well is many times without us even knowing it, right? We fill in blanks. So if there's ambiguity, we'll make stuff up and we'll fill it in. We'll substitute our own reality for whatever's missing. So, hope and change. What kind of change? Well, you're allowed to substitute whatever you want. Make America great again? What's great? Well, it's whatever you think it is.
Jon DiPietro, thank you so much for joining me. I'll put links in the episode description to everything Jon's got going on. Definitely check them out. And if you happen to see one of these trainings in your area, please do give it a look and consider attending. We want to change our politics in the right direction. You do it by getting out there and being involved one way or another. It's been the New England Take. Like and subscribe. Check out the podcast version of the show on all major podcast platforms. And we'll talk to you soon.